Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sincerely Self podcast. Today, we are joined by the amazing Ursula Taylor. She is a consultant, a former litigation attorney, and she is also a thought leader and speaker. So, Ursula, tell us a little bit about you and your journey.
Yeah, thank you, Lex, and thank you for having me today. So my background is actually litigation. I'm a trained attorney. I practiced commercial litigation for about 17 years. I went to law school here in Chicago and then went to a big firm and then pivoted to a smaller firm, developed a niche in healthcare managed care, and then joined an even smaller firm to sort of pursue that specialty and then ultimately opened my own firm. And as I got further along in the law firm world, litigation, I always thought the way out was up. So I kept going and going until I was a partner and ultimately had my own clients in my own firm. But I still felt limited. I've always been a really intuitive person in terms of being able to read people and read a room. I think it helped me in my practice of law, but the system and structure of litigation is really limited because at its core, every conflict comes from human emotion. Really, everything we do as humans is driven by emotion. We're just not always conscious and aware of that. And we live in a world where we sort of prioritize more of an external way of being and doing. We're looking for winners versus losers. We're looking for judgments. We're looking for vindication and righteousness and this sort of separateness and fear. But at its core, conflict is really just an opportunity, if you allow it, to not only understand another person, but first and foremost, to understand yourself. So when you can perceive conflict as emanating from human emotion, you're better situated to resolve your dispute and also have some personal growth along the way. The problem with judicial systems is that there's really no space in that process for finding human emotion or finding the true drivers of conflict. So I started my consultancy with that understanding.
Yeah, that's amazing that you put such a focus on the human emotion because, yeah, I think it has kind of gotten lost, like you said, in the judicial process. It's not even really taken into account anymore, even though it has such a big role in almost every single conflict. So I
Mhm.
love that that has been such a big focus that you guys have put.
Yeah, yeah. So at the end of the day, I mean, trial lawyers do understand this, and trial lawyers are trained to tell a story and to evoke emotion and to align to and sort of seek the buy-in, the emotional buy-in of the triers of fact, the jury or the judge or whoever. So on some level, attorneys and lawyers know that what they ultimately need to win their case is to leverage human emotion. But then when you think about what pretrial process is, it really just perpetuates conflict because you're mired in facts, laws, and arguments, which are not actually the drivers of conflict. And so when you think about resolving conflict, what attorneys and mediators are doing when they're settling a case, it's more like a ceasefire. And I would kind of analogize it to if you were at war, and the battlefield is sort of full of bloodied bodies. It's the paramedics that come in and sort of, but what can we do to prevent the war to begin with? How can we start thinking about that in a higher way?
Yeah, I love that analogy because it really does kind of put it into perspective of what can you do at the beginning instead of having to try and fix things at the end when it's already happened.
Right, right. And as a litigator who practiced for 17 years, nobody is in the business of litigation, right? Nobody's bottom line or nobody's sort of values in terms of why they have their business or what they're trying to accomplish is about winning trials or winning arbitrations. What people want is they want out, right? They want resolution. They want to not go through the pattern again. They want to maybe learn something along the way. And so I'm trying to short circuit that for people and organizations and teams.
Yeah. During your time as a litigation attorney, what have you noticed? You had mentioned at the beginning how you are very empathetic and you are kind of like an empath. You run a lot on emotions.
Mhm.
How have you been able to use that as a tool in litigation?
Sure, sure. I mean, it all starts with self-awareness, We
Mhm.
have to have an awareness of ourselves. We have to be able to step outside of ourselves. And, when a feeling comes up or an emotion comes up, note that and become aware of that. And really through my own kind of personal evolution and healing, did I get to the space where I'm able to really have clarity about what other people are going through. And then you can sort of just hear it. You can hear it in their voice. You can hear it in the energy. You start to unpack it. You can feel whatever it is, the pride, the insecurity or the scarcity, the fear. I mean, it's usually a fear-based emotion, whether that's guilt or pride or fear or insecurity or shame or whatever it is, there's some fear-based emotion that's emanating someone. But we stay really stuck in the external. We tell the story about the other person without first dealing with what's coming up within us. Unless and until you can have personal clarity of yourself, you really aren't going to have the clarity in terms of what's actually happening in the dispute.
Would you say that in most of the cases that you've seen, it tends to be kind of the same thing, like the fear-based and
Mhm.
just focusing so much on the external?
Right. It always is. It always is. And that doesn't mean there's not practical solutions. But when people are really mired in that emotional charge, it's hard to have perspective. It's hard to sort of be able to look at the dispute in terms of, the problem and the solution. Because when we're not emotionally charged, everything is neutral. It's kind of like looking at it in terms of an Excel spreadsheet. When you sort of release your own emotional charge, you can have more clarity and understand it, kind of going from like sort of the Instagram post or the TikTok post with the music and the sound and the lights to just like this dulled down Excel spreadsheet with numbers and columns. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. And once you can get to that sort of black and white perspective, neutral perspective of dispute, it's not that hard. And it's also not that hard to come up with estimated chances of success for litigation and estimated budgets for litigation, and really be able to evaluate the litigation path in more of a black and white way. And I think if people were able to do this, if they understood the tools and the paths for doing this, we would see a lot less arbitration and litigation because it's a really expensive and uncertain tool for resolving a dispute. It's a blunt instrument, I would say.
Oh, yeah. What advice would you give for maybe those litigation attorneys who struggle with getting to that black and white space where there is no leaning one way or the other?
Yeah, I think it's mindfulness, any modalities around mindfulness, any modality that helps you slow down, and that can be different for different people. And it applies to the lawyers as well. I'm glad that you said that because I think there's a lot of attorneys who we end up adopting the emotion of our clients, and that's
Mm.
not surprising because at its core, everything's energy, including our thoughts and our emotions and our words. And when there's an energetically charged client or litigants, I mean, the best attorneys are the ones who can sort of have sort of a thick layer, but there's a downside to that. They can't appreciate what's really going on and what's really at stake, but at least they
Mhm.
can move through it and not absorb the energy themselves. It's really important for the attorney to develop some self-awareness because if you absorb that emotional charge from your client, you're just perpetuating that forward. You are becoming a victim. You're like operating from a space of righteousness, and you're really resolving nothing. You're just kind of pushing it forward in a sort of a snowball that perpetuates.
Yeah, I love that you put such a focus on the energy side of it because it's so true. We don't realize a lot of the time how big of an effect energy plays into things and how if you're not aware of it, how it can kind of have an effect on your judgment in a way as well. So I love how you bring that into play because it is so important to recognize.
Right, right. What we know, like from quantum physics and science, is that the law of attraction, right? Energy attracts more of the same. So if you're acting and reacting from a space of fear or pride or anger or scarcity, you're going to just spread that. And if the next person is also not really self-aware and conscious and taking that pause and taking that space for self-reflection, then that person's going to push that forward. And it just goes on and on and on, and lawyers can participate in that drama and that illusion, if you will. And until
Mhm.
I mean, I think that the key piece that we as humans are only just beginning to understand through mental health and different modalities that hasn't really been integrated in things like our judicial system, is that we think that we create our peace externally. We think that abundance, prosperity, peace, love, success comes by going out into the world and affecting what's around us, seeking to control environments or persuade people or affect, certain scenarios outside of us. And then that's going to bring the feeling on the inside. It's actually the opposite. We're just kind of coming to this phase of our human evolution where we really are integrating this. But what we create on the outside actually comes from the inside. When you
Mhm.
cultivate that self-love, that peace, that sense of abundance from within, then it flows outward. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot there, and it can be integrated into things that are as sort of harsh and stark and cold as like judicial systems or healthcare, education, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so amazing how aware of all of this you are, because I think it takes so many steps to get to that point where you realize all of these things, you realize that you create your reality, you realize the effect that your internal world has, how it creates your external world. So I think it's so incredible that you've been able to incorporate it into like judicial law, like you were saying, in healthcare and these things and help people realize like the first thing that you have to start with to fix is the internal, because yeah, like you were saying, we do instinctively try and change the external when there's things we don't like, but really our first step is always within.
Right, right, right. I like to say that we are the vessels and purveyors of peace, but it starts with our conversation with ourself, self-awareness, consciousness. Yeah, really, really understanding what's coming up for us and sitting in that. The most important component of conflict resolution is the initial conversation you have with yourself. And from that, you can have the clarity so that strategic decisions are more effective. And that's the piece that's missing. But it can feel scary, like I think it can feel scary to think that like, oh, this is like something I have to do, but it's actually empowering. It's actually empowering because what it means is that we actually have the tools to not only resolve conflict, but also create just a more fulfilling life and a more fulfilling relationships and teams and businesses and organizations and ultimately prosperity. So yeah, it feels really good to serve in this way versus as a litigation attorney, sort of perpetuating conflict through discovery and motion practice and things like that.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that it is scary because I think that's not something that's focused on kind of enough is when you start realizing this truth, it is kind of scary because it changes all the beliefs that you've had up until this point. So for
Mhm.
you, what was kind of like the beginning moments where you're able to kind of accept this and also integrate it into your life?
That's such a good question. I think I started realizing the illusion of blame, fault, and judgment somewhere around, I think it was like the fall of 2020. Was it fall of 2022? I was going through a tumultuous time in my marriage, and we ultimately decided to separate and we're getting divorced. But through that process, kind of learned a lot. And blame, fault, judgment really keeps us limited. It keeps us from really exploring ourselves, understanding the other person. Because imagine how liberating and freeing it would be to be really open and curious about yourself and the world if blame, fault, and judgment weren't a thing. We don't have to decide who's right, who's wrong, whose points get allocated in which direction. We don't have to do that to ourselves or other people. And it's just an awareness because all feelings are valid and they're really just pathways to understanding ourselves and the world. So I think going through a challenging time in my life and coming to the realization that blame and fault has no place or space in a fulfilled and abundant life was revolutionary for me. And then the other piece I think is somewhere along the line. I'm a spiritual person and also read different spiritual texts and things as well. And from that was introduced the concept that specialness isn't real. And Wow, that sort of like blew my brain, right? Specialness isn't real. Our whole world is fueled on specialness, better than, less than, right? Work hard to be the best. But what's baked into specialness is not just this idea that some people are wonderful and great and high achievers and successful, but you have to have the people under them to have the people above them. And so you're really not only limit everybody else, but yourself, because you can't always be the most special in the room, right? You can't always win. You can't always be the best. So you're constantly operating in this space of less than and unworthiness. But when we can adopt an ideology of like, what if that doesn't exist? What if we're all just, unique beings with different gifts and different strengths to be honored and understood? Then, once that kind of fell away, then I sort of started to really kind of understand how to serve in terms of conflict resolution.
Yeah, it is mind altering to realize that like everything, like the special and the more than the less than, like how integrated it is into our society. And then also like, yeah, how value is just whatever we think it is, whatever if something's better, it's just because that's how we think it's better, you know? So I love that that realization was such a pivotal point for you because it is really such like a crazy thing to realize that like the external only has as much value as we think it does in our internal self.
Hmm.
So that's amazing that you're able to kind of use that into your world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's just these core kind of ways in which humans operate. And in this time we're in right now, this very chaotic time in politics and climate change, and we're watching different systems and structures kind of crumbling or in chaos.
Mhm.
It really is kind of calling into question a lot of foundational ideologies on which those systems are built, which are specialness, better than, less than, exclusive, prestigious, blame, fault, right, wrong. Um, the problem in my mind is not the guilty party, whoever that is. The problem in my mind is operating from a level of consciousness where we're constantly focused on pointing the finger in us versus them. So, yeah.
It's just the competitive nature. I feel like that is definitely what the world is in this moment, is just competitiveness. Who's better, who's worse. Yeah, like the blaming game is what
Mhm.
it seems to be. And it's so easy to kind of get lost in that. So, what advice would you give for just keeping your emotions separate from the things you see in your external world?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I think the important thing is that you cannot, and really honoring and accepting that we can't keep emotions separate, in the sense that we can't make them go away. We can't
Mhm.
repress them, because when we do that, all we're doing is pushing that in, and that energy, because everything's energy of that emotion is still in our bodies. And what's happening when an emotion comes up, fear, anger, sadness, is a call to feel it. The way to sort of mitigate or evolve or transmute that emotional energy is to feel it. That's the only way. So developing a way to immediately feel emotion when it's small, through slowing down, through mindfulness, developing an ability to be self-aware, that's really the ticket. And I think that we spend a lot of energy and time trying to compartmentalize and separate. Don't let emotion get in the way, says the mediator or the judge or the lawyer or whoever, or the corporate executive. And we've seen people who are successful because they have an ability to do that, to repress or keep to the side. But we also have substance abuse and mental health impacts from that. I
Mhm.
think the most powerful humans are those who are willing to accept and honor the emotion as it comes up when it's small, and feel into it and release it, get clarity, be able to bring a sense of self-love to it and to the situation.
Yeah, I love that advice. I love that perspective as well because it is so true. The more that we try not to feel things,
Mhm.
the more it's going to get bottled up and the worse it's going to get. So when it does come out, it's just going to be more catastrophic in a way. So I love that you're saying just feel it as you need to and just give yourself grace because yeah, emotions are normal and in society we're told kind of to not feel those negative emotions, but
Mhm.
really those are the ones that teach us the most. So I love that you use that as like a catalyst into healing.
Yeah, yeah. And when I speak about, thank you. And when I speak about non-judgment, the most important person to not judge is yourself. So
Mhm.
it's not a bad thing when emotions come up in a big way. But if you don't sit and sense of curiosity for yourself in terms of why, asking why, then you've missed an opportunity. So a big display of anger isn't the problem, but to sort of shame yourself, judge yourself, push it to the side and try to continue on, that will become a problem, or it will just continue. It'll come up again later. It'll be a pattern in your life, in relationships.
Yeah. And it's so important to address it because, yeah, like you were saying, it will become a pattern. It will continue to happen. And the only thing that will stop it is yourself, is the internal work. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So the last thing that I want to kind of ask you about, Ursula, is on your LinkedIn, you have a quote that says, "There are higher and more effective methods for resolving disputes when we know what conflict is and where it comes from." So kind of walk us through like what conflict truly is and where it kind of stems from.
Right. Conflict comes from the humans who hold the emotional energy of conflict. And it doesn't matter if you find yourself in a dispute, if you find yourself animated or charged or affected in any way by the situation, it doesn't matter how egregious the words or the conduct or the choices of the other person are, there is something for you. There is something for you as a participant, as someone affected by the dispute. And so what that means is there is actually quite empowering because it takes two people to be in a conflict. And if one person can develop the self-awareness and the consciousness to bring a higher form of thinking to it by sort of getting clear on their own emotional charge, releasing some of that emotional charge, it only takes one side to resolve a dispute. Because once you don't have that energy emanating back and forth, it's much easier to then come up with the strategic clarity in identifying the problem and also the solutions in terms of strategy. But it's when it's ping-ponging back and forth between two people who are unconscious that you can never get there. So yeah, I think self-awareness, finding that emotional energy within yourself is a path to resolution of conflict.
Has there ever been a time where you've been working with clients and you've been able to watch them kind of go through this awareness process and one of the two parties was able to kind of come to this self-awareness and end the cycle?
Right, right. Yes, definitely. I mean, it doesn't mean that litigation is always avoided completely. That doesn't always
Mhm.
happen, but we can shorten litigation processes by having clarity. I think when there's an emotional charge, it's really easy to go to victimhood and righteousness, and you're sort of looking for a judge to satisfy that feeling, right? That need for retribution and punishment. But when you've released that, then you can get some clarity. And like I said earlier in the call, it's not that hard to analyze litigation as an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, here's the range of costs based on X assumptions. Here's your chances of success based on claims and defenses. You can make litigation a math problem if you want to. We don't because there's generally too much emotional charge. So I've definitely helped clients avoid litigation, or at least when they are choosing it, really understanding the costs and the benefits and the risks that are at stake and hopefully shortening the process or making it less amplified. Because in addition to the length of the litigation, there's also the scope. It can get really expansive and costly depending on the
Mhm.
number of claims, the parties involved, the nature of the claims, the counterclaims and such. So I
Yeah.
help people sort of see it more cleanly, see it more clearly, and navigate it more efficiently when they do have to go that route.
Mhm. I love how your insight is such a testament to the fact that our emotions are at the root of everything. Emotions kind of control everything that's going on in the world. And so I love that you've been able to identify that and use it in your cases, in your business, in your speaking to help other people realize that really the root of being able to fix any sort of conflict is self-awareness and is doing the inner work.
Right, right. And I think for any business leader that's trying to run a business that is successful in terms of, financial prosperity, certainly is incentivized to understand higher, more efficient, and more holistic ways of understanding conflict and navigating conflict.
Yeah, exactly. So, last question I have for you, Ursula. What are you doing with your speaking now currently? Like what kind of like events are you going to, and what are kind of your main focuses that you've been touching on?
Yeah, well, I can really speak to anything because what I talk about and the principles and the foundational ideas of what I'm talking about can really be applied to anything.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of speaking to sports coaches and sports mentors, for instance. There's something to bring to that topic of conversation. Certainly politics, how to live in this world that we're in with this us versus them that's permeating our media and our social media and beyond. There's this sense of what do we do about it? I have strategies and ideas for how to effectively be in this society and not feel sick to your stomach and actually contribute in effective ways that actually have an impact on the world. I speak to peacemaking more broadly. I love speaking to business leaders about how to get back to doing the business that they are cultivating and growing as opposed to the cost and uncertainty of litigation. I love talking to individuals who might be going through custody disputes or family law disputes. When I was growing my litigation practice, I was speaking all the time on the Affordable Care Act and litigation around the Affordable Care Act as I built and other government programs as I built a niche in healthcare and
Mhm.
managed care and complicated subjects. And I feel like nothing's wasted because the skills I gained in terms of public speaking, the ability to talk about any issue is something that I feel like I do well and I enjoy. But ultimately at my core, what I really want to do is serve in terms of helping humans be better humans, helping the world run in a better way. And that starts with each of us understanding ourselves.
Yes, I love that. I asked what kind of audience you usually speak to because while we have had this conversation, I feel like you can relate the subject of law of attraction, the subject of spirituality, the subject of self-awareness to literally anything in life because when you are so aware and in tune with it, like you can see it in any aspect of life. So I love that you really can talk to anybody and bring it into any sort of business, sports, whatever it is, because it's in whatever you're doing, because it's just
Right.
in who we are. So I love that you've
Mhm.
been able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think often the hook is like litigation and litigation process and arbitration help me understand what I can do, what a judge can help me do, what an arbitrator can help me do. And so conversations start in that regard. And I'm certainly capable of offering practical advice in terms of that process and its costs and strategy around that. Um, but where the conversation ultimately goes, because we want to efficiently resolve a dispute by understanding it, conversation will ultimately flow into sort of that emotion and that self-awareness.
Yeah. It's amazing that you've been able to kind of figure out that little secret thing that not many people notice, that emotions play such a big part.
And it's
Yeah.
nothing to be dismissive or shameful or judgmental of. It's actually something to be
Mhm.
honored and appreciated because it is an opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today, Ursula. I will have all of her information linked in the show notes, so no matter where you're listening to this podcast, you guys will be able to go and check her out. Like she said, she speaks to really any sort of audience. So go and check her out, follow her LinkedIn so that you guys don't miss out on anything that she uploads. And I will see you guys next week.